Putin thought he could poke NATO with a stick and get away with it, until Romania decided the stick was coming back broken. For months, Russian drones have been crashing the party, breaching NATO airspace like they own the place, buzzing Romanian border towns and terrorizing civilians. The Kremlin kept pushing, kept testing, kept assuming the alliance would blink. But Romania didn't blink. They scrambled F-16s, locked onto the intruders, and pulled the trigger, bringing down 3 drones in 3 days. The repeated interceptions sent a clear signal that NATO was prepared to defend its airspace and would respond decisively to any further violations. As Moscow is now discovering, mistaking NATO's patience for weakness comes with consequences. Because what began as isolated border incidents has evolved into repeated crossings of a line that was never meant to be crossed. That triple shootdown in late July turned out to be only the opening move, because just weeks later, Romania found itself sounding the alarm 3 separate times in a single day. On August 13th, at 1:30 in the morning, a drone slipped across the border near the village of Pardina and stayed inside Romanian airspace for roughly 10 minutes before a second target crossed in right behind it for another 2 minutes. By 9:02 that morning, 2 Romanian F-16 jets were already scrambling out of the 86th Air Base in Borșa, and 11 minutes later, an emergency alert went out to every resident across Tulcea County. The day wasn't finished. At 3:17 in the afternoon, a third drone crossed the border just 3.5 kilometers southeast of Chilia Veche and lingered inside Romanian territory for close to 12 minutes before turning back toward Ukraine's Izmail. This time, it wasn't Romanian jets that responded first. 2 Spanish F-18 fighters, flying under NATO's own air policing mission out of the Mihail Kogolnicianu Air Base, scrambled to track it down. The all-clear didn't sound until 4:28 that afternoon, closing out Romania's 3rd air raid alert of a single day. Every one of those 3 incidents traced back to the exact same source, a massive Russian drone assault slamming into Ukraine's Odessa region, specifically targeting the grain and port infrastructure running along the Danube River, right on Romania's own doorstep. Romania didn't stop at scrambling jets that day either. A separate sea drone detonated near the Black Sea port city of Constanța without causing any casualties, adding yet another data point to a single 24-hour window that alliance officials are now calling one of the sharpest escalations NATO's eastern flank has faced in this entire war. Bucharest's patience had already run out well before this particular day even began. Following this exact pattern of repeated violations, Romania formally expelled a Russian diplomat and pulled its own ambassador out of Moscow for high-level consultations, a diplomatic move typically reserved for genuinely serious breaches, not routine border noise. On the ground, Romania backed that diplomatic message with actual manpower, deploying an additional 600 troops and rolling mobile radar systems into position along the Danube, while regional air defense batteries across the entire Romanian-Ukrainian border were placed on high alert. That pressure didn't stay confined to Bucharest for long. NATO's own North Atlantic Council convened an emergency meeting in Brussels, formally condemning Russia's repeated violations of both Romanian and Polish airspace as, in their own words, dangerous and unacceptable. The alliance placed full responsibility for the breaches squarely on Russia and announced it would accelerate integrated air and missile defense systems across the entire eastern flank, stretching from the Baltic all the way down to the Black Sea. The same emergency session had another Polish incident to weigh alongside Romania's, a Russian Kh-101 cruise missile that had crossed into Poland and crashed near the village of Tarnowa Colonia, leaving behind a large impact crater and triggering its own wave of scrambled jets and civilian emergency alerts. NATO officials described the pattern bluntly, warning that Russia's actions now demonstrate an increasing tolerance for risk, while making clear the violations would not shake alliance commitments to Ukraine. Poland's own defense minister, Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, said the emergency meeting proved the alliance was ready to take new actions to protect the integrity of its frontline borders. Romania's NATO representative, Dan Neculescu, pushed the point even further, stressing the immediate need for allies to keep expanding active defense capabilities, specifically along the Black Sea. 2 days before that Brussels meeting, Romanian divers were already back underwater, dealing with yet another piece of Russian hardware. On August 11th, Army divers and explosive disposal specialists carried out a controlled underwater detonation to destroy 2 Russian Gerbera-type drones discovered drifting roughly 90 nautical miles east of Constanța, right beside the Neptune deep gas platform, the single largest gas project currently under development anywhere in the European Union. A civilian construction vessel working on the platform spotted the drones first, and Ukraine's own military confirmed the drones didn't belong to them before Romania moved ahead with destroying them. That platform isn't some minor target either. Once fully operational in 2027, Neptune Deep is projected to make Romania the largest natural gas producer anywhere in the European Union, with enough surplus output to supply Moldova, Ukraine, Hungary, and Austria at the same time. Romania's defense minister, Radu Miruța, didn't mince words about what that means for his country right now. He described an entire sector of the Black Sea as a literal war zone, with drone debris regularly washing ashore depending on which way the currents happen to be running that week. Now here is where this story takes an unexpected turn. Before we reveal what happened next, do us a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the Frontline Show. We are the only channel exposing every move Russia makes. Trust us, you do not want to miss what is coming. While Romania was scrambling jets over the Danube, a completely separate incident was unfolding just across the border in Moldova, a country that isn't even a NATO member and has almost no way to defend itself from what showed up in its own backyard. On August 9th, a combat drone slammed into a tree near the village of Krokmaz in Moldova's Stefan Voda district, close enough to the Ukrainian border that residents felt the impact immediately. It detonated roughly 2.5 meters above the ground, tearing into rooftops and outbuildings and sparking a vegetation fire. Nobody was killed, but debris scattered across a wide stretch of the village. Moldova's own defense minister, Anatoly Nosati, confirmed early analysis pointed to a Russian propulsion drone, describing it as more technologically advanced than anything that had previously landed or exploded on Moldovan soil. Police classified the wreckage as a rocket drone, essentially a drone-missile hybrid built with guided propulsion, a category Moldova had simply never encountered inside its own borders before. Moldova's government didn't stay quiet about what that meant. Its foreign ministry called the strike a serious violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity that had directly endangered civilian lives. And in response, Moldova pulled its own ambassador, Lilian Deri, out of Moscow for consultations. Foreign Minister Mihai Popșoi said plainly that the incident could not help but impact relations with Russia, given that Russian attacks on Ukraine were now creating direct risk on Moldovan soil. President Maia Sandu went even further, condemning the violation of Moldova's airspace in the strongest terms, warning that this is a direct consequence of Russia's war. It endangers us all. The risk to human life in our region is real and growing. It must stop. What made the moment especially uncomfortable for Moldova's own government was Nosati's admission that the country's radar coverage simply doesn't fully guarantee surveillance of its own airspace, since certain drone types are far harder to detect depending on altitude and terrain. Moldova has spent the years since trying to close that gap, acquiring new detection and neutralization equipment, though the minister confirmed the effort is still ongoing rather than complete. The scale of the escalation becomes clear once you look at Moldova's own incident count since the war began. The country recorded just 4 airspace violations in 2022, climbing to 6 in 2023, 10 in 2024, 17 in 2025, and already 16 in 2026 alone, with months still left on the calendar, making this year the sharpest jump recorded since the invasion started. Moldovan authorities issued a direct public warning to residents in the aftermath, telling people not to approach any unknown object, to notify police immediately, and specifically to avoid using mobile phones nearby, since the latest generation of these devices can apparently be sensitive enough to trigger detonation through nearby signal activity. Popșoi summed up the government's position bluntly, stating the only measure that can truly protect Moldovan citizens going forward is direct investment in air defense and drone countermeasure systems. Moldova's neighbors have started backing that vulnerability with practical support. Effective August 10th, Moldova granted Ukraine a 50% discount on rail transit for Ukrainian cargo, running through the end of 2026, agreed directly between Ukraine's Prime Minister Serhiy Koretsky and Moldova's Prime Minister Vasile Tofan. Starting August 17th, the Kyiv to Chisinau train route is also being restructured to make transfers to Chisinau's airport considerably faster for Ukrainian travelers. That kind of support matters more than it might sound, given that Ukraine recorded 67 separate port attacks in July alone, along with 35 strikes on vessels sitting in port waters and another 22 against ships actively in transit. Romania has stepped into Moldova's corner just as directly. Bucharest took over management of Moldova's only maritime outlet, the port of Giurgiulești on the Danube, a move that prompted Russia to formally accuse Romania of turning the port into a military logistics hub for Ukraine. Romania and Moldova have since folded that same checkpoint into the EU's own Danube Action Plan 2, specifically designed to secure both military mobility and grain export logistics around Russian naval blockades. On the ground, Romania's 15th Mechanized Brigade, based in Iași and nicknamed Podu Înalt, now serves as Moldova's primary military training partner, running joint exercises on river crossings and border observation, while Romania separately feeds Moldovan border guards real-time NATO radar data, giving them an early warning window before Russian drones ever reach their territory. Further north, Lithuania isn't waiting for its own Krokmaz moment to arrive. On August 12th, the Lithuanian government approved an updated fortification plan running along its entire border with Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad exclave, establishing a 20-meter counter-mobility belt stretching from the border patrol track into Lithuanian territory, backed by additional 150-meter wide belts in zones the armed forces designate as operational. Engineering equipment parks tied to that plan are now set for completion by the end of 2028, pushed back from an original 2025 deadline simply because the number of planned sites grew from 27 locations to 50. Lithuania's problem isn't only happening above ground either. Border guards from the Varna unit recently discovered an unfinished 4-meter tunnel dug from Belarusian territory near the village of Letejuris, sitting roughly 1.5 meters underground, reinforced with logs and wooden planks, with its Belarusian entrance hidden under camouflage fabric. Guards found it using specialized detection equipment supplied by Poland. That tunnel wasn't a one-off discovery either. It was the third one uncovered by the same border unit in a matter of weeks, following a 5-meter tunnel found on July 23rd and an 11-meter tunnel found on July 26th. Lithuania has now logged 12 separate underground crossing attempts since the start of 2026 alone. Both the tunnels and the traffic above them fit into a much larger number. Lithuania recorded more than 9,600 illegal border crossings intercepted in just the first 7 months of 2026. Defense Minister Robertas Konis confirmed the government now has a specific plan mapping out exactly what fortifications belong inside 5, 20, and 50-kilometer zones from the border, along with which decisions need to be made at each layer. Lithuania is also preparing for a scenario most countries never have to plan for, an active border becoming genuinely unsafe to store supplies near. The government intends to relocate strategic reserves of food, fuel, and other critical supplies away from the Belarusian frontier entirely, moving them into safer interior regions by 2027. As of April 2026, 60% of border facility supplies had already been moved to central Lithuania, with the country's fire and rescue department reserves scheduled to follow once 2 new storage facilities are finished. Latvia's own border troubles have deepened past the checkpoint closure, already reshaping the region. In early August, Latvian forces detected 15 people who illegally crossed the state border through a dug tunnel, built specifically by smuggling networks to move migrants directly into the Schengen zone. Latvia answered by launching Operation Vilkatis, meaning werewolf, deploying its national armed forces alongside military drone surveillance and round-the-clock vehicle checkpoints across every eastern road in the country. Western intelligence assessments and Latvia's own government have stopped describing any of this as a migration story at all. Officials now call the surges exactly what the evidence suggests: a state-orchestrated hybrid attack managed jointly by Minsk and Moscow, aimed at destabilizing both the European Union and NATO from the inside of its own eastern border. While the Baltic states dig in along their land borders, Germany found itself confronting something far more alarming: an explosive device sitting on the tarmac of one of NATO's most critical logistics hubs. On the night of August 4th into 5th, a quadcopter drone loaded with 800 grams of military-grade plastic explosive and a specialized detonator was discovered at Leipzig Halle Airport, parked right beside several Ukrainian Antonov An-124 heavy cargo planes. Investigators later determined the drone had actually flown directly into the wing of a fully fueled cargo aircraft and simply failed to detonate because of a technical malfunction. The response on the ground moved fast once the device was spotted. A bomb disposal robot was brought in, and the Federal Police's own explosives unit successfully removed the detonator before the southern runway reopened the following evening at 6:46 p.m. The target itself explains why this incident alarmed NATO so quickly. Leipzig Halle serves as the primary base for NATO's Solace program, which uses those same Ukrainian An-124 cargo planes to move military equipment reinforcing the alliance's entire eastern flank, an airport that handles roughly 1.4 million tons of freight and 2 million passengers every single year. American intelligence agencies didn't leave much room for ambiguity either, briefing their German counterparts directly and confirming the explosive drone belonged to a Russian intelligence service, either the FSB or the GRU. Germany's own Interior Minister, Alexander Dobrindt, called the episode a genuine hybrid attack scenario, stating plainly that the technology and methods involved simply didn't point to amateurs. Chancellor Friedrich Merz went further, saying, "Germany's working assumption is that Russia sits behind most of these drone incursions, and that the sheer intensity of what Europe is now seeing has officially shattered Cold War records." Leipzig wasn't an isolated data point either. It fit inside a pattern German investigators had already been tracking. Federal police confirmed more than 1,000 unauthorized drone flights over Germany in a single year, systematically targeting LNG terminals, naval bases, and military logistics hubs across the country. Investigators traced a number of these flights back to Russian merchant and commercial cargo vessels operating inside or near German territorial waters. The scale of the broader problem stretches well beyond Germany's own borders, too. The London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies (IISS) reported that the Kremlin orchestrated a sustained surveillance campaign involving 144 separate incidents across Europe between August 2024 and February 2026. Germany's own domestic numbers tell a similarly steep story. Munich Airport was forced to halt operations for 2 full days back in October 2025 because of drone sightings. Up in the far north, Finland has been dealing with its own version of this exact pressure, though Helsinki has chosen a noticeably quieter way of handling it. At 4 a.m. on August 14th, Finland's defense forces locked down a large section of airspace and restricted maritime shipping across the eastern Gulf of Finland, triggered by concerns that stray drones might drift into the area during Ukraine's own massive strike on Russia's Ust-Luga oil port just across the water. The restriction lifted again after 8 a.m., described officially as a precautionary step meant to protect civilians while giving authorities room to respond if anything actually crossed into Finnish territory. That single closure wasn't a one-off either. It was at least the 6th airspace restriction Finland has imposed in just 4 weeks, following nearly identical measures on July 2nd, 4th, 6th, 18th, and 28th. Each of those closures has followed the same basic pattern: narrow in geography, short in duration, typically lifted again within a few hours without any confirmed drone actually crossing into Finnish airspace. Finland's caution traces back to a specific incident that taught officials just how easily assumptions can go wrong. Back in late March 2026, 2 drones crossed into Finnish territory and crashed near the town of Kouvola, prompting Defense Minister Antti Häkkänen to open a formal investigation. Finnish Colonel Jiri Kasola later concluded those particular drones could not have physically reached Finland from Ukraine at all, a finding that undercut the initial assumption entirely and left the actual origin of the incident murkier than officials first believed. A separate, more disruptive scare hit closer to Finland's capital in mid-May 2026 when Ukraine accidentally directed drones carrying explosives towards Finland, triggering a regional alert across Uusimaa and a 3-hour disruption to operations at Helsinki-Vantaa Airport. President Alexander Stubb responded to that incident about as calmly as any national leader could, stating afterward that Finland faces no direct military threat, a deliberately measured, non-escalatory line that has defined Helsinki's public posture throughout this entire stretch. That same restrained approach nearly got tested from an unexpected direction the same month. In May 2026, a Romanian NATO jet flying a Baltic air policing mission shot down a Ukrainian drone over Estonia, an incident that prompted Kyiv to issue a formal apology afterward, a reminder that even friendly aircraft can end up caught inside this same tangle of airspace confusion. The spokesperson for Ukraine's foreign ministry, Georgi Taiki, said, "We apologize to Estonia and all of our Baltic friends for such unintended incidents." Finland is still hardening its eastern frontier regardless of that quieter tone. The government has proposed extending its own Border Security Act through 2028, keeping its land border with Russia permanently closed rather than treating the closure as a temporary wartime measure. On the military side, France is set to join the existing Swedish-led NATO battle group stationed in Finnish Lapland, marking a real expansion of Allied military presence along Finland's northern flank. Lithuania's own defense minister, Robertas Kaunis, added a sharper warning to the broader picture, cautioning that Russia may be preparing a false flag operation using captured Ukrainian drones specifically designed to make NATO waver and pull back its support for Kyiv, a plan he stated flatly will not work. Every one of these incidents, the drones over Finland, the tunnels in Lithuania, the explosive device at Leipzig, points back to the same regime, making the same calculation that it can keep testing NATO's edges without ever paying a real price at home. That assumption is exactly what's starting to crack, and not on some foreign battlefield, but inside Russia itself. In our last video, we covered exactly that, the growing wave of dissent now reaching Putin's own inner circle, ordinary Russians and even former loyalists openly demanding his resignation while the country's economy buckles under the weight of this war. If tonight's story showed you how far Moscow is willing to push against the outside world, that video shows you what happens when the pressure finally starts building from within. That video is right here, and it's the piece of this story you genuinely cannot afford to miss. This is the Frontline Show, and this war is moving faster than almost anyone is prepared for. We'll see you in the next one.